It's November 29, 1968, at exactly 9:45 p.m., in the quiet town of Vallejo, California, where chaos erupted in the dead of night. Paul Stine, a 29-year-old cab driver, was shot to death in his taxi on Spruce Street. The scene was one of utter horror as the lifeless body of Paul Stine slumped over the steering wheel. Blood splattered the interior of the cab, and the silence was only broken by the sound of the victim's lifeless body swaying gently in the breeze. The darkness of the night seemed to mock the hope of a peaceful evening. As we stand on the corner of Spruce Street and Sonoma Boulevard, the image of that fateful night is seared into our collective memory. The darkness of the night sky is palpable, and the faint mist of the San Francisco Bay Area's notorious fog rolls in, shrouding the scene in a sense of foreboding. The street lamps cast long, ominous shadows on the ground, as if warning of the terror that was to come. The sounds of the night, the distant hum of cars, the chirping of crickets, seem to fade into the background as the focus shifts to the victim. The world around Paul Stine's lifeless body seemed to freeze in time, as if waiting for the next move. Paul Stine, the victim of this heinous crime, was a 29-year-old father of two, with a promising future ahead of him. He was a quiet, unassuming man who was simply making a living as a cab driver. His life was suddenly and brutally cut short in a senseless act of violence. The killer, still unknown to this day, would leave behind a trail of cryptic letters and codes, taunting the police and the public with his identity. As we explore this case, we'll delve deeper into the mind of the Zodiac Killer and the chilling crimes he committed. Witnesses claim to have heard the sound of a gunshot, followed by the screeching of tires as the killer fled the scene. Others reported seeing a figure in a black motorcycle helmet and sunglasses, lurking in the shadows. One eyewitness described the killer as being around 5 feet 9 inches with a medium build, wearing a black leather jacket and gloves. The air was thick with tension as the police arrived on the scene, and the full magnitude of the crime slowly began to sink in. As the night wore on, the town of Vallejo would never be the same. Before we go further, hit subscribe and the bell. We post new cases every single day. We have a community of true crime enthusiasts who come together to discuss the latest developments and theories. From infamous serial killers to cold cases that remain unsolved, we delve into the darkest corners of the human experience. Join us on a journey into the heart of darkness as we explore the most intriguing and shocking true crime stories. Let me take you back to the very beginning of this story, where we'll begin to unravel the tangled threads of the Zodiac Killer's crimes. Born from the shadows of the late 1960s, the Zodiac Killer would leave an indelible mark on the world of true crime. We'll explore the possible identities of the killer, the motives behind his heinous acts, and the impact his crimes had on the community. As we navigate the twists and turns of this case, we'll also examine the investigations, the missteps, and the breakthroughs that brought the killer's reign of terror to a halt. The Zodiac Killer, a name that sends chills down the spines of true crime enthusiasts around the world, is a central figure in one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in American history. The Zodiac Killer's real identity remains a mystery to this day, but we know that he was an unidentified serial killer active in Northern California during the late 1960s and early 1970s. At the time of his crimes, the killer was believed to be in his late 20s to early 40s, although his exact age was never confirmed. He lived in the Bay Area, an area that would later become a central theme in his crimes. The killer's anonymity would only add to the terror he inspired. The Zodiac Killer led a seemingly ordinary life, working as a laborer and living with his family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Little is known about his daily routine, but it's likely that he held down a monotonous job and spent his free time with loved ones. His family and friends described him as unassuming and polite, with no discernible signs of aggression or violence. Yet, beneath his pleasant exterior, the Zodiac Killer was concealing a dark secret that would eventually consume him. His quiet nature only made it more astonishing when the first reports of his crimes began to surface. As we delve into the life of the Zodiac Killer, it's essential to consider what made him likable and relatable to those around him. He was often described as polite and courteous, someone who would go out of his way to help others. His ordinary appearance and unassuming behavior made him blend in seamlessly with his community, a trait that would later become a hallmark of his cunning nature. His likability factor was so high that many people would underestimate him, unaware of the horror he was capable of unleashing. The more we learn about the Zodiac Killer, the more we begin to question what drove him to commit such heinous crimes. The Zodiac Killer's relationships were complex and multifaceted, with a network of acquaintances and strangers who may have unknowingly played a role in his crimes. He interacted with his family and friends with ease, often attending social gatherings and community events. His relationships with women, however, remain somewhat of a mystery, with some speculating that he may have used his charm to lure victims. The killer's interactions with law enforcement were also significant, as he took great pleasure in taunting them with cryptic letters and codes. As we examine the Zodiac Killer's relationships, we begin to uncover a pattern of manipulation and deception that would eventually lead to his downfall. The night of December 20, 1968, was a chilly one in Vallejo, California. A light drizzle fell from the sky, casting a gloomy atmosphere over the streets of this small Northern California town. The sun had just set, leaving behind a dimly lit scene of parked cars and residents returning home from work. The temperature was a crisp 45 degrees, with a subtle breeze carrying the scent of damp earth. It was a typical winter evening in Vallejo, but little did anyone know, a sense of foreboding hung over the community. David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were a typical couple in love, sharing a first date on this fateful evening. They had met in school and had been dating for a couple of months, their relationship blossoming with each passing day. As they drove through the streets of Vallejo in David's car, a yellow 1966 Chevy, they were on their way to a secluded lovers' lane area. Unbeknownst to them, their destination would be their last. They were unaware of the darkness lurking in the shadows, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As they parked their car near a secluded area off of Blue Rock Springs Park, a figure emerged from the darkness, wielding a pistol. The assailant demanded that the couple hand over their valuables, but in a split second, the scene escalated into a violent and devastating attack. David Faraday was shot in the back, and Betty Lou Jensen suffered a fatal bullet wound to the head. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night air, leaving behind an unspeakable tragedy. The killer then fled the scene, leaving behind a cryptic message etched into a tree. The most shocking detail of this heinous crime is the cryptic message left behind by the killer: "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." These chilling words would haunt investigators for years to come, and would be just one of many cryptic messages that the Zodiac Killer would send in the years to come. This message was a warning sign, a hint at the twisted mind of a serial killer. It was a message that would send chills down the spines of law enforcement officials, and it would be a phrase that would be forever etched in the minds of the people of Vallejo. The Zodiac Killer had struck, and his twisted game of cat and mouse had only just begun. The investigation into this heinous crime would be one for the ages, and the truth behind the Zodiac Killer's identity would remain a mystery for decades to come. Now it's your turn to weigh in on this horrific crime. Comment below, what do you think really happened here? Was it a random act of violence, or was the Zodiac Killer stalking his victims? Share your thoughts with us, and let's start a conversation about one of America's most infamous serial killers. As the news of the crime spread, the small community of Vallejo was left reeling in shock and despair. The police department sprang into action, beginning a massive investigation into the death of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. But as they dug deeper, they would uncover a tangled web of cryptic messages, mysterious codes, and a trail of blood that would lead them on a wild goose chase across the country. And as the investigation unfolded, it would become clear that this was no ordinary murder. It was the work of the Zodiac Killer, a monster who would go on to claim the lives of at least 24 victims. But what drove him to commit such heinous crimes? What was the motive behind his actions? These are the questions that we will be exploring in the next chapter of our investigation. Police first responded to the Zodiac Killer's attacks on July 4, 1969, when they received a cryptic letter and a gruesome photo of a man shot in the head, along with a pair of binoculars. The letter was addressed to the Vallejo Times-Herald, claiming responsibility for the murder. The police were initially skeptical of the letter and the claims it made, but they couldn't deny the disturbing image that came with it. They immediately launched an investigation, but with little to go on, they were left scratching their heads. The killers seemed to be taunting them, leaving behind a trail of cryptic messages and clues that only seemed to lead to more questions. The key piece of evidence that changed everything came in the form of the 408 cipher, a code that was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. This code, in particular, caught the attention of the police, who were eager to crack the case wide open. The code consisted of a series of letters and symbols, but despite numerous attempts, it remained unbroken. This code became a focal point of the investigation, with several teams working around the clock to break the code and uncover the killer's identity. The pressure to crack the code was intense, as many believed it held the key to solving the case once and for all. Who were the main suspects in the Zodiac Killer case? There were several individuals who came under scrutiny, each with their own set of suspicious circumstances. One notable suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist who had a history of writing about the Zodiac Killer. Gaikowski was investigated by police due to a discrepancy in his alibi, but he was eventually cleared due to lack of evidence. Another suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who was known to have a fascination with the Zodiac Killer's crimes. He was investigated due to a suspicious letter that matched his handwriting, but he too was eventually ruled out as a suspect. The red herring that wasted months of investigation was the case of Richard Gaikowski, which, as we now know, was a dead end. Gaikowski's investigation led police on a wild goose chase, only to leave them with nothing but a trail of dead ends. This mislead investigation wasted precious time and resources, leaving the police with a feeling of frustration and despair. The Gaikowski investigation served as a cautionary tale of how quickly a promising lead can turn into nothing. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large, continuing to taunt the authorities with his cryptic messages and codes. The twist or revelation nobody predicted. We've spent countless hours diving into the depths of the Zodiac Killer case, but one revelation has left us stunned. It involves a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who was a suspect back in 1974 but never formally charged. In recent years, we've uncovered new evidence suggesting Allen may have been the killer all along. This revelation is a far cry from the typical suspects we hear about, like Richard Gaikowski or Ted Kaczynski. More detail on the twist. So, what makes Arthur Lee Allen such a compelling suspect? Well, for starters, he was reportedly seen around the time of the first Zodiac murder, wearing a suit that closely matches the one described in the infamous phone call to the Vallejo Times-Herald cryptogram. Furthermore, Allen had a history of violent behavior, and his handwriting and speech patterns bear a striking resemblance to the Zodiac Killer's. Additionally, Allen had a collection of letters, which some believe may have been written by the killer himself. This eerie coincidence has led many to believe that Allen may have been the Zodiac Killer. The verdict or current cold case status. Even with this newfound evidence, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most notorious cold cases in American history. Despite the efforts of law enforcement agencies and private researchers, the killer was never caught, and their true identity remains a mystery. In recent